This is a shir on Likutei Sichos, Vayakhel, book 26, Chelek Vav, the second Sicha Vayakhel. The pasuk where it says the instruction of Hashem that Moshe gave over to the Bnei Yisrael, Kechu meitchem truma la Hashem, take from yourselves a truma, a donation to Hashem. Kol nediv libay, anybody generous of heart, yivieha eis trumas Hashem, shall bring the truma, the gift to Hashem. Mepharshim asks, the Rabbi brings in the footnote, the Kli Yakar, that l'chaira there is a contradiction in the pasuk from the beginning to the end. In the beginning, the pasuk says, "Take from them a trumat Hashem." So from this we infer, it sounds very much that the truma has to be taken from them, even if it should be against their will. This has to be enforced. However, from the continuation of the pasuk, which says that everybody who's generous of heart shall bring, this has the understanding that it's voluntary. The spirit of generosity comes upon the Jew and he brings the carbon. So is it need to be taken from them, or is it given voluntarily? And what is explained, and again the Kli Yakar explains, is that the pasuk is talking about two kinds of giving. The beginning, the pasuk is talking about take from them the truma. That's talking about the obligatory half shekel per head, which this was indeed an obligation on everybody, and it had to be demanded from everybody. And then it says there's another, it continues the pasuk, then there's other truma, there's another donation that's given based on generosity. This is talking about the truma that everybody brings based on his generosity of heart. And has nothing to do, and it's not something that can be demanded, it's not something that requires somebody to go and demand that they should give it. There isn't a demand. The obligation is half shekel. The donation that he gave beyond that for building the Mishkan was given voluntarily. However, you have to understand, this pasuk is already talking about the instruction of Hashem, how Moshe transmits it to the Bnei Yisrael. Where do we find out the original instruction where Hashem tells Moshe what to say to Bnei Yisrael? Here it's Moshe telling the Bnei Yisrael, and he speaks two languages. I'm going to take Truma from you, and you should bring Truma. We have that one question. In the instruction of Hashem to Moshe, when he tells him what to tell the Bnei Yisrael, it doesn't say anything about bringing. It says about taking. It says, Daber Bnei Yisrael, Pashas Truma, speak to the Bnei Yisrael, v'yikhuli Truma, they shall take from me Truma, from me'ez kol ish asher yidbenu libay, from every person who has a generous heart. So it says generous here. The word doesn't say they should give it. Tikhu, even from the generous ones, you shall take the Truma. And this is the Truma, continues the pasuk, v'zeis Truma asher tikhu miyatom, this is the Truma you should take from them. In other words, you find that everything here, the three languages in the pasuk, in the original instruction of Hashem to Moshe, what to say to the Bnei Yisrael, there's only take, nothing about giving. And even though that these psukim are speaking and reminiscing about three different types of trumas, like Rashi points out there's three donations that, because it says three times the word, take my truma. So that refers to three trumas, which is what? Two that are obligatory. One is the half shekel that goes for creating the sockets of the Beis Hamikdash, the foundation of the Mishkan. The other is the half shekel that needs to be given annually in order to contribute to the fund that the communal karbonis sacrifices would be bought from. Their third one is the voluntary truma that everybody brings for building the Mishkan, the needs of the Mishkan. So yes, there is within those three one that is brought based on individual generosity. So the concept of generosity is there, but still even there, it doesn't say bring, it says take. So why is it that in the original instruction to Moshe to speak to the Bnei Yisrael, it's all about taking? When Moshe relays it to the Bnei Yisrael, he mentions it in two dimensions, take, and then he says everybody who's generous of heart should bring. So paragraph B says the Rebbe as follows: we could suggest that perhaps this is hinged on another differential between the psukim, between here and in Truma. In Truma, where there's instruction of Hashem to Moshe what to tell the Bnei Yisrael, there it says that Hashem said to the Bnei Yisrael, speak, Adaber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Bnei Yisrael. Here it says, Vayakhel Moshe, es kol adas Bnei Yisrael. There it says, speak to the Bnei Yisrael. Here it says, and Moshe gathered the entire community of the Bnei Yisrael. One second. So this gathering and speech to the entire community was not just, by the way, to say the first two paragraphs of the parsha, which is that you have to keep Shabbos, and even though you're building a Mishkan and doing holy work, you can't build the Mishkan on Shabbos. That's the first two paragraphs. After it says that Moshe Rabbeinu gathered everybody together in a big assembly, more than the usual gathering when he spoke, which, as the Rabbi brings in the order, that those that wanted to hear came. But when it says Vayakhel, that it was a special gathering, means everybody was there. So it was to tell them not just about Shabbos, although they're building the Mishkan, still keep Shabbos, but also all the rest of the instruction that follows in the next paragraphs about building the Mishkan. So in Parshas Truma, Hashem tells Moshe, speak to the Bnei Yisrael. Here Moshe goes and actually assembles the entire community. Kol Hadas Bnei Yisrael. What's the difference? We can say that the difference is when you say Daber el Bnei Yisrael, not as in Parshas Kedoshim where it says Daber el Kol Hadas Bnei Yisrael, right? Where it says Daber el Bnei Yisrael means that there's no emphasis that the instruction is to the entire community. What we'd have to say is that this is it's possible that this was actually an instruction to a select group, in other words, the officers in charge of the accounting, the Gizborim. The treasurers have to take the 3 trumas for the Bnei Yisrael. Now we would understand why it says take. Right? But now when Moshe, so that Hashem is telling Moshe, speak to the treasurers, first of all, that they should make the collection, and therefore the language is always take. Now when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the entire Jewish people, and he's speaking not just about the fact that there needs to be a system where you elect treasurers who should take, but now he's speaking about the actual personal obligation everybody has. So he says, by the way it relates to you all is, besides for taking, there needs to be a giving, and the giving needs to be in a way that the generous are coming forth and giving. Okay, that could be, but it's not so clear because understandably, Moshe Rabbeinu would not have expanded on the instruction that Hashem told him to say. If Hashem said to speak in a language that refers mainly to the treasurers, take, how would Moshe Rabbeinu have added a dimension and said, give? Now, we do find in many places that we don't always see where Hashem had told Moshe what to say. So in other words, Moshe will say things, and we look back and we see that we didn't see exactly where Hashem told him to say that. But we know if Moshe said something to the Bnei Yisrael, Moshe never said anything on his own. So we understand that Hashem had said it. It's just possible the Torah didn't tell us that detail that Hashem had said, that Hashem had given this instruction to Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's possible to say that this was also incorporated in Hashem's instruction to Moshe, just it wasn't spelled out there. It said there also that they should bring with generosity, not just take, but bring with generosity. And Moshe spelled it out when he spoke to the Bnei Yisrael. Right? However, besides for the fact that also if there is something that Moshe Rabbeinu that was not stated explicitly, and Moshe Rabbeinu added it, we still want to understand why is it? Why Hashem doesn't write it in the Torah that he said it explicitly, and why only it's written in the Torah that Moshe said it explicitly. But besides for that general concept, here particularly, everything is so spelled out. This is different than any other case where perhaps an entire topic was left out, and Moshe spoke to the Bnei Yisrael, and we understand that Hashem had said this topic, right, even though it's not recorded in the Torah. Here the topic is recorded. The instruction of Hashem to Moshe is recorded. But it's and it's not like it says it in brief. So we could say that in the instruction it just says brief, it's not unpacked. When the Torah tells us how Moshe spoke to the Bnei Yisrael, it unpacks. Moshe unpacked what Hashem had already told him. But the Torah just didn't tell us all those details before. But in our case, hard to say that. Because if you read the Parshas of Truma and Tetzaveh, you see that it's details upon details. The general making of the Mishkan and the instruction. It wasn't a terse, short, encapsulated statement. It's a fleshed out a series of psukim where Hashem tells Moshe what to tell the Bnei Yisrael. Yet it doesn't say anything about that the general shall bring the Truma of Hashem. All of a sudden, Moshe and Moshe's communication to the Bnei Yisrael, it shows up. So why is that? Paragraph 3. Say the explanation is the concept of the Mishkan is that it should be an atonement for the sin of the Egel. Like Rashi says, the reason why it's called Mishkan or Eidos, the Mishkan, the resting place of Hashem of testimonies, what is it a testimony to? Eidos li Yisrael, this is a testimony to the Jewish people. Shaviter lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ha'maysa Egel, that Hashem had forgiven them for the sin of the golden calf. For he resided, he rested his holy presence amongst them in the Mishkan. This is a visual, clear symbol, testimony to the Bnei Yisrael that Hashem has forgiven them. Well, we know that there's two opinions, and actually three opinions. The two opinions that Rabbi addresses here in the Sikha is, there's an opinion that the instruction of Hashem, you see, when we read the Parshias, you have Truma Tetzava, which is Hashem's instruction to Moshe, V'asu li mikdash, may they make for me a mikdash. Then we have Parshas Kitisa, which is the sin of the Egel. Then we have Hashem's, Moshe speaking to the Bnei Yisrael, Vayakhel Moshe, assembling the Jews and telling them to make the mikdash. So when did this happen? There's an opinion that Hashem's instruction to Moshe was before the sin of the Egel, right? And there's opinion that the instruction to Moshe was also after the forgiveness from the Egel. Either way, the Bnei Yisrael only got the instruction after the sin of the Egel and after they were forgiven. So if Hashem gave the instruction to Moshe before the Egel, the fact that the Bnei Yisrael were still on track to do this and they were instructed by Moshe after the Egel means that they were forgiven. If the whole instruction about the Mishkan took place only after the Egel, then for sure it was something that wasn't even spoken about before the sin. They sinned. You would think that they'd be rejected. And now Hashem comes with a new instruction, says, I want to have a permanent place amongst you. I'm going to reside with you. So it's an edus. It's testimony that their sin has been forgiven. How do the Bnei Yisrael show? How do they express in building the Mishkan their regret and their true remorse for doing the sin of the Egel? The way they do this is that they show that instead of being engaged in their gold, bringing the gold, which they did at that time with Zrizus, they brought it with alacrity. Remember, Aaron said he thought he's going to tell them to bring their jewelry. It'll take time till they convince their wives, their children to give up their wives to give up the jewelry. The men were so full of Zrizus, they were so full of energy and enthusiasm, they took their own gold and they came and brought it right away. The delaying tactic didn't help. So they had enthusiasm and zeal for the Egel. Now they have to give gold, and they're going to give it with a generosity, with an extraordinary generosity to build the Mishkan with enthusiasm, with excitement, so that the Shekhinah should be by them. The Shekhinah should rest among them. The exact opposite of the Chet Egel, of the sin of the Egel. And indeed, that's what happened. We find that the Psukim tell us in our parsha in Vayakhel that they literally came and brought, and the appeal was one day. After one day, Moshe Rabbeinu had to say, "That's it, done." They brought enough. The Rebbe says that if you look in the Midrashim, I haven't looked them up. Actually, now I think I would like to look them up. The Midrashim speak about how the abundance, the Tanchuma, Bamidbar Rabbah, the abundance of how, if you hang on, at the end of the Shia, I'll go run to get a medrash and maybe paraphrase. But what's expressed here is the fact that in one day they all came and they excitedly and with enthusiasm, with zeal, they brought the entire whatever was needed. So and it was enough. It was left over. It was unbelievable. So in this itself, so you see that they've turned, that they're now becoming totally committed to Hashem. And in this itself, says the Rebbe, when do you see in a real way that the Yidden have had regret, and now all they want is that Hashem should be with them in a complete way, in a full way. So it's not so much the obligatory half shekel that everybody has to give, because there's an obligation. Everybody has an equal obligation. There's no expression really there. Even if you do it with enthusiasm right away, without dilly-dallying, right away, you bring the half shekel, but you don't have a full expression of the inner desire of the heart. You bring something that you have to bring, and everybody's bringing the same thing. You could say that, as here says the Rebbe, when somebody fulfills an obligation with alacrity and without delaying, you could say he feels a sense of obligation. He doesn't want to walk around feeling he has something hanging over him, so he does it right away. In the truma, which doesn't have an obligation and doesn't have a compulsory amount, everybody gives it from their own volition, from their own feeling, their own generosity. In that voluntary and non-required gift, that's where you see where they truly are, where their true excitement is. That's where you see the goodness of the heart, the desire in their heart, the fullness of heart, that they want the Shechina to be there, opposite the Chet HaEgel, opposite the sin of the, what you call it. And this is the reason why in the instruction of Hashem to Moshe about this Truma, all it says is the detail of the Lekicha. It says, from every person that has a generous heart, they shall take the Truma. It doesn't say about the giving that the generous heart will bring. It doesn't speak about the bringing, because the instruction of Hashem is mostly about the functionality of taking. The treasurers have to take. We need to fill the quota. We need to fill the need of the Mishkan. However, the giving is the input of the Yidden in a way that they want to be able to show not their obligation. The whole point of the Vayakhel is to show their excitement, to show their deep feeling of generosity, which should express in a mirror way what they feel to Hashem, that the same way Hashem has forgiven them, they also feel a joy and a full oneness with Hashem, and they want to express it in their giving. So Hashem speaks about what's needed. He can't speak about how they should come. That has to come from them. But they come and say, and particularly now when we ask to give not just the obligatory, but what we give voluntarily, Moshe Rabbeinu says, bring it in this way. When he transmits to them the way they should give. Paragraph 4. This concept that the generosity of the Yidden to the work in the Mishkan, not the way it is in terms of the instruction from above, but the way it is from their impetus, from their input, is not just related to the atonement for the sin of the Egel. This is also, and even mainly, to the quality of the relationship that Hashem has in his Shechina resting in the Mishkan. We know it's explained in many places in Chassidus that even though the Yidden by Matan Torah, they saw tremendously exalted things. Hashem came down the Mount of Sinai, and it says, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, you saw. Nonetheless, and indeed, they were elevated temporarily. It says that Pascha Zu Amasam, their negativity, their negative spirit totally ceased. They became elevated individuals. Nonetheless, 40 days later, they fall into the sin of the Egel. How is that possible? Because the revelation of the giving of the Torah was a top-down relationship. It was Hashem revealing himself. And therefore, what was achieved and what was refined by the Yidden was not something that was internalized and was retained as something that became who they were. It was something that was beamed upon them from above. And once Hashem stopped that process of Ani Amaschel, Hashem initiated the descent, but once Hashem retreated somewhat, then that aspect was no longer beamed onto them, and it hadn't transformed them internally in a sustainable way. So, not just, because this wasn't their own developed kind of avodah, they hadn't prepared for it, they hadn't then made it part of something sustainable within them. So even after this great revelation of Matan Torah, there was a possibility to fall into this worst sin of the Egel. Similar, the way it puts the Rabbi here in square brackets, the way it is in the sanctity of Har Sinai itself. In the time of the giving of the Torah, by Yed Hashem al Har Sinai, you have to cordon off the mountain. In the physical mountain, there was incredible kedusha, incredible levels of kedusha. If you touched the mountain, anybody touched the mountain died. But right after that, when the shofar sounded, which was a sign that the Shechina is ascending, then it says, hey, they're allowed to go up in the mountain. Har Sinai thereafter returns to its original status of being totally at the other extreme. From the extreme holiness, it becomes a mundane mountain. If you go and found Har Sinai now, you can go up on there, no issue. Even though at the time of the giving of Torah, the kedusha transmitted through it in a way that a person that touched it couldn't contain the kedusha, he'd die. This concept that the Yidden in and of themselves create internal change and work through things, which makes them vessels, which makes them worthy to receive the light of kedusha in a permanent way. This was expressed in the giving of the truma with their joy and with their fullness of heart, through giving away their own gold, silver, and copper for the Mishkan. Not because Hashem had told them. Hashem had only told them half shekel. That was an obligation. But the part that they're giving from their generosity, which Moshe is emphasizing, you're bringing it from your generosity. That actually allows for the Shekhinah to rest. Of course, the Shekhinah is resting in the Mishkan and in the Bnei Yisrael. It becomes a permanent thing in the community of Yisrael, because now it becomes part of who it is. They worked through it in their own physical experience in this world, that it's their gold indeed, but they're giving it on their own volition, elevating it to be brought to Hashem. That's sustainable. That becomes a real change in their makeup. And therefore, in the nefs, the actual object, and the physicality of the Mishkan, forever after, there is Kedusha. As we know that the portions of the Mishkan were then later hidden in the Beis HaMikdash, in the tunnels, they're forever after holy. Paragraph 5, according to this, we could also explain another difference between the two parashas. The expression in Parashas Truma, when it speaks to this obligation, is Me'ez kol ish asher yidvena libay. From every man whose heart brings him to give. In other words, there's the half shekels, and then there's the third truma, which is voluntary. But when it says it there, it's speaking still about taking it, and it's also addressed to men. It seems to be that the men have an obligation to bring additional items to build the Beis HaMikdash, to build the Mishkan. In our parsha, it says, Kol nediv libay. Anybody generous of heart shall bring the truma of Hashem. Anybody generous of heart, it doesn't speak to only men. That includes women also. Especially that this entire instruction was said not just to David el Bnei Yisrael. Moshe assembled Kol Hadas Bnei Yisrael. Moshe assembled the entire community of Israel, which means not just the men but also the women. As the Ramban points out here in the parsha, that this Vayakhel means that explicitly there was an instruction, not just the men who wanted to come and hear the word of Moshe show up, the women needed to come as well. As we see in the way that things develop in the parsha, that in the donations for the Mishkan, indeed, in actuality, who contributed? Not just men. It says that the men came as secondary to the women. In other words, in a way, the women were more eager. The men came too. So we have to understand why in Parshas Truma doesn't it ever mention that in this third Truma, so in the first Machzah Shekel for the sockets is men. The Machzah Shekel for the Karbonis fund is men. But the third one, which is to build the Mishkan, where everybody brings whatever they want, which we see here, Moshe Rabbeinu includes the women, and indeed women brought. Why in the instruction of Hashem to Moshe isn't it included there? It's interesting that the Sephorah says why the men came. The women were coming to bring their donation. Why did the men come to accompany them? The Sephorah says because there's a law that if a woman comes to bring something of common property of the household, before one takes it, even for a holy purpose, one has to know that it's with the agreement, acquiescence of the man, because it's their joint property. She needs permission to be able to give it. So they came with their wives as they were giving considerable, substantial donations to say, yes, we agree with this. But certainly in the actual contribution and the way Moshe projects it, spoken to women, this third voluntary one. Why doesn't Hashem mention it when he gives the instruction? Paragraph 6, the explanation is like this. We know that the concept of man and woman is generally speaks to the delineation of two aspects in the flow of life. There's the giver, there's the receiver, the nurturer. And that's why Bnei Yisrael, Hashem and the Jewish people, the collective of Knesset Yisrael, are compared to a chassan and a kala, to a man and a woman. There's the giver, Hashem, is there the nurturer, the receiver, the Bnei Yisrael. This is also the reason why Torah Shebichsav, the written Torah, is called Musar Avicha, the teachings of your father, because Hashem dictates the exact wording, the exact details of the written Torah, whereas the oral Torah, Torah Shabbat, is called Torahs Imecha. In the pasuk of Shlomo Melech, Shema Medi Musar Avicha, hear my son, the teaching of your father, that's Torah Shebichsav, the written Torah. Va'al titosh, don't abandon Torahs Imecha, the teaching of your mother, that's the oral Torah. Why is the oral Torah referred to as mother? Because the written Torah is given in a very clear, distinct, immutable way from above. That's Hashem giving the exact details of the Torah. However, the revelation that happens through the oral Torah happens through the process of the Yidden extrapolating from that. They have to toil in Torah. They have to innovate in Torah. It was already given, and the tools were given, and everything was given from Sinai. But it was given in a way that the Jewish people have to process it through their own intellectual capacity. And every generation, there becomes more and more revelation because it becomes further extrapolated, further unpacked. Today we have zip files, further unzipped and developed. And that's why it's called Torah Simecha, the Torah of your mother. It's a feminine. It's like a Isha who's a nurturer and a developer. As in the process, the man provides the seed and the woman provides the entire baby, develops by her nurturing in her womb. So the Torah Shebaal Peh is developing through this process of being received by Bnei Yisrael, by the Mekabel, by the recipient, and nurtured by the feminine, being developed. And this is why we find that when we talk about man and woman, literally, amongst the nation of Yisrael, women have an added advantage. They're on a higher level. They have things that are more developed over men, which is that in them the concept, the avodah of this avodah of receiving, nurturing, developing is more emphasized by the women. As we see that women don't need so many reminders on Yiddishkeit like men. They, by their very nature, the light of the belief in Hashem, the innate nature itself is conducive to the belief in Hashem and the fear of Hashem, more than by men. The men need reminders, they need encouragement. By women, it's a more innate thing, and they actually, in actual life, they project and they are more connected to Hashem intrinsically. That's why, as the Rabbi points out in the footnote, we see by the Egel Taka, the women didn't sin. They intuitively and intrinsically and innately did not lose the plot. The men needed the inspiration, and Moshe disappeared for a while, and they lost it. The women didn't lose it. Because their Avodah is the Avodah of Mekabel. To assimilate the concept within them, and it becomes part of them more. So you don't just lose your sight of the goal when all of a sudden 40 days later, Moshe didn't come. They didn't do the Egel. And we find by the first mitzvah of Pru, the mitzvah to procreate, the actual commandment of Pru, to be fruitful and multiply, is a commandment given to a man. The woman, she's a participatory, but the mitzvah itself is not her obligation. Why not? Not because she doesn't have a part and a major portion in bringing children to the world. You know, there's some mitzvahs where because she has other obligations, so those mitzvahs are removed from her. The mitzvahs that are time-bound, one of the reasons she doesn't have the mitzvahs that are time-bound and not obligatory on her is because she has other obligations. She's already has a commitment in the context of marriage, as a commitment to her family, to her husband, to be there, to provide for the house, and therefore there cannot be things that are taking her away from her main commitment to run the house. That's her main commitment and mission from Hashem. So Hashem says, I'm not giving you the time-bound mitzvahs because that would make you unable to be fully committed to the things you have to do. Okay, so that's a competing mission from Hashem. She says, I give you this mission, so I'm not giving you the time-bound mitzvahs. But here, the fact that she doesn't have the mitzvah, she doesn't have the instruction of Pruhu, is not because there's something else competing against that. On the contrary, she is such a critical component The Rebbe says, Adrab, Adrab, on the contrary. The whole possibility of the man fulfilling his mitzvah of Pru is only when he has a wife. So she's very, 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 very much part of this whole thing. The actual birth is taking place through the woman, 9 months, in the womb, and then birth itself. The woman is called Akeres Abai. She is the foundation of the house. So why isn't she part of that tzivui, of that instruction of approval? So you know why? Exactly that the reason. Says the Rebbe, because by a man there needs to be an instruction. Without the instruction, we can't rely on him that because of his very nature, because of his very makeup, he'll do that. He may remain aloof. The word chosen, quotes the Rebbe in the footnote, is chos darga, chus darga. Chus means to lower yourself. He has to be told that don't stay in your aloofness. You need to create another life. He needs a mitzvah to do that. A woman doesn't need a mitzvah. By her very disposition, by her very nature, generally speaking, there's a maternal instinct. And the woman feels that her mission on this world is to be the founder of a house and to establish generations of future Jews and make sure that Am Yisrael has a continuity. She does it innately without the need for a mitzvah. This is also one of the reasons why, as an introduction, this innate understanding of the woman in terms of her mission, in the continuity of the Bnei Yisrael, is also one of the reasons why before giving the Torah, Hashem said, first go speak to the women. Speak to the women and speak to them in a soft way. Not like when you speak to the men, Vesaged, speak to them, Dvarim Koshim Kegidim, speak to them tough like a sinew. It denotes a soft tone. Speak to the women softly. They don't need that you should speak to them in a harsh and a firm in an assertive way. They're ready to take on Torah mitzvahs. You can speak to them softly. They're ready. It's in them. Paragraph 7. And this is also the explanation here in our topic. The advantage and the virtue and the greatness of the women bringing their donation, even more than the men, has to do with this third truma. Because again, the first two, they're manly things. It's you have a shekel, it's an obligation. Here we're not talking about an exact amount. There's no definitive amount. It has to come based on your level of generosity. And even it's not that you don't bring a certain amount. You don't even have to bring. There's no obligation to actually bring that third truma. Only because of generosity of the heart. It says that in a footnote, the women, they didn't need this kapara. They didn't really need this atonement. They didn't sin, right? So really, they wouldn't have been obligated. Although, says the Rebbe, the Rambam does say that the women, that the obligation to build the Beis Hamikdash today is on men, women, and children, just like on men and women, just like the children. Just on men and women, just like the women in the Midbar were obligated. But we're saying here that the women shouldn't have been obligated, because if it's coming as a tzarichi, and the Rebbe says we have to further think about it. But let me not take you on that sidetrack. So here what the Rebbe is saying, that this third truma that we're saying has to be a voluntary one. It comes from nidivus halev, comes from the spirit of generosity. In this developed generosity, bottom up, coming from within, women are more developed. Women are more innately connected. They're going to be the leaders in this, as we see they were. And that's why in the Parshas Tumah, where Hashem is speaking about his instruction to the Bnei Yisrael, there's no need to emphasize the women's participation in this as something unique. Yeah, it didn't say that the women shouldn't bring that third truma, but it didn't emphasize it, because that's about getting the items, the obligation of the Bnei Yisrael to the 2 half shekels, and the other truma that should be taken from the generous people. It wasn't talking about the experience of giving. Here in our parsha, we're talking about how the Bnei Yisrael are actually going to give it and express their generosity, and in this way show their remorse and show their total turnaround from the previous Egel experience. Here it's emphasized, and Moshe Rabbeinu emphasizes this context that it also applies to women, and women have a even a superior position in this. And it was actually the women that just didn't express itself in the fact that they brought more, even the way they brought, because they didn't just bring their precious jewelry, but it says that they came and they gave their skill. They weaved with a special way. This especially talented and skilled women were able to spin the goat's hairs on the goats itself, which required incredible talent. In other words, they really brought the best that they could bring to the table in terms of their abilities, their wisdom, and their possibilities in the donation for the Mishkan. This way, showing the total buy-in to wanting to have making this place for Hashem. Additionally, base too, in the end of the parsha it says they also, besides the copper that was brought as a commodity, as a donation to the Mishkan, they brought the most dearest things that they had, their mirrors. And that was used for the kiyar and the kayim, for the wash basin, for the faucets in the wash basin. And as Rashi brings there, that those maris, those mirrors, were the mirrors that the Bnei Yisrael used to create the forces, to create the legions of Bnei Yisrael that left Egypt, to create the children. This was something that they had used to beautify themselves and make themselves attractive before their husbands, so that their husbands should want to have the continuity of the Bnei Yisrael, although they were exhausted and although they were demoralized. And Dafka, this Nadav, Hashem says, I love this. Chaviv and Alam Akol. Moshe Rabbeinu was a little hesitant. These mirrors are used for something very, very feminine and very down to earth, to make themselves attractive to their husbands. Hashem said, no, this is more beloved than anything else. He wasn't sure if this belongs in the Beis Hamikdash. Hashem said, no, this gift shows how dearly they want to give whatever they have to Hashem. Because what did they use it for? These mirrors were an expression of not losing the track like the men had, which didn't have demoralized, didn't want to have a continuation. They had an innate feeling that we need to keep the Bnei Yisrael, we need to keep the continuity, we need to make sure that our husbands are with us and that we bear children and that we have a future. Hashem says this is an expression of true makeover, of true presence of Hashem in the human experience. I mean, this is what the Mishkan is about, to bring Hashem's presence into us, into the lower world. So this feminine expression is actually very, very dear in the process of the Mishkan. Paragraph 8. According to this explanation, in the difference between the men and women, we can also explain a Zohar. The Rabbi gives us a gift now to explain a difficult Zohar. What does the Zohar say? The Pasuk of Vayakhel Moshe, the Zohar says, Rabbi Abba opened up and it says, Hakel Esam Anoshim Atoshim Ataf. It says, Vayakhel Moshe, that Moshe gathered. Rabbi Abba quotes another pasuk in the end of Parshas Varim, where the obligation of gathering all the people once every 7 years, on the 8th year in the Beis Hamikdash. And there it says, gather men, women, and children. And Rabbi Abba says, just like there, Hakel is men, women, and children. Ma'ala halon kalala dukuli Yisrael. Just like there, it's the assembly of the entire Jewish people. Ufacha, also here it says that Moshe gathered, same lashon, Vayakhel kalala dukuli Yisrael. It's the total, sum total of the entire Jewish people. Uman inun, continues the Zohar. Who are those? Shittim ribe, the 600,000. 1 second. This is not understood. We say that this is the Hakel. Rabbi Abba wants to say that this gathering is just like the mitzvah of Hakel, which is men, women, and children. But there, which is, as he says, Kolala Degul is all the entire community of Israel. And he wants to say that here it's also like that. So how does he say, but that's the 600,000? 600,000 is only men from 20 years upwards. It doesn't, obviously doesn't include women and children. Right? So, how does the Zohar say that Vayakhel here is just like Vayakhel by the Hakel mitzvah, which is men, women, and children, which is a 600,000. It's not 600,000. So that says we can say the explanation is like this. The number of 600,000 it says by going out of Egypt And as we find many places, and Chazal tell us that the Jewish people are considered to be 600,000. They left Egypt with 600,000. It's obvious that the Torah was not just given to those 600,000 above 20 men. The Torah was given to all men, regardless of their age, to all women and children as well. On the contrary, it says, "So you should speak Lebeis Yaakov." In the preparations to the and lead up to the Matan Torah, Hashem says, "Speak to the women," and only after that, Sagi the Bnei Yisrael, speak to the men. Another thing, you want to talk about the kids? We know that the whole discussion that Hashem had, Hashem said, "How do I know who's the guarantors that I'm giving you the Torah that you're going to keep it?" You know, from the Shavuos discussion, we said, "Baneinu areivim badeinu," our children will be the guarantors. In other words, Hashem is giving the Torah also to the children based on the fact that they're going to be guarantors. They're going to carry it further. So He's not just giving it to 600,000. So why, when we talk about the giving of the Torah, we speak just about 600,000? Why don't we talk about elsewhere? The Rebbe says a number 2 or 3 million people that were there, men, women, and children, under 20, and so on, and women and children. So why do we talk about 600,000 in Matan Torah? But here we'll understand it based on what we just explained. Matan Torah was Hashem's coming down and resting His Shechina from in a way of top down. When you talk about that level of expression of Shechina coming from above and residing down below, the details of the recipient are not what's highlighted. What's highlighted and what's felt, the presence that's felt, is the presence of the one that's beaming down, that's providing, that's the mashpia, the giver. The recipient is a subsidiary, is a recipient of what's being given, but that they're not they're not highlighted here. What we're highlighting is the greatness and the incredible power and intensity and awesomeness of the giver, of the mashpia. So therefore, we're not talking here about the way it's integrated and the way it's developed from the context of the Mekabel. So therefore, women are not highlighted there. They're not counted individually. They're counted in the general count of the 600,000 men and their families. In other words, this is just a count of the family units. So we're counting each man over 20 who's already considered to be an individual and very likely have a family unit. Each one represents that and their family. And we don't have to talk about the details of those 600,000. So the Torah is given to the 600,000 and everything that those 600,000 encapsulate and include within them, which is the women and children as well, and the younger than 20s. If you're younger than 20, I guess you were included in your father's mishpacha. If you're over 20, you have your own household, and you already have ostensibly wife and children. They're all included in your number of 600,000, as so to speak, like a zip file, yet unpacked. That's why the Zohar says that this Vayakhel here, which is an introduction to the Nidava of the Mishkan, was given to the entire Jewish people. Not like by Matan Torah, where the women were, so to speak, I want to use this word, subsidiaries, where the women were included in the family unit that's delineated by the man, one of the 600,000. No, here the women and children are expressed as individuals, because we're talking here about the next step, not about Hashem's coming down, but about the building of a Mishkan bottom up, just like by the mitzvah of Hakel. By the mitzvah of Hakel, Rabbi says, it says here Vayakhel, the mitzvah of Hakel. Mitzvah of Hakel is not just for men. It's spelled out there. It's not just that we say the men should come, and by definition, the men will have an impact on their women and children and make a difference in the house. No. We say that we enunciate and spell out every group that came. Every group came as an individual group. In other words, there's men. We say, why did the men come? They came to learn. The women came to hear and absorb. The taf, the children, in order to give reward to those that brought them. So we fully flesh out, we fully define each of the groups that came. Similarly, when it came to the Nidava to giving for the Mishkan, since here we're talking about highlighting and emphasizing the avodah of the generosity of the bottom up of the way the Bnei Yisrael had reformulated themselves to become givers, to become zealous and enthusiastic about giving to Hashem. We're talking about the makabel, we're talking about the receivers, we're talking about the people down here changing. So the women and children as individual groups each have an added advantage and virtue. Even though they do become included in the 600,000. So we want to emphasize that this included men, women, and children, not like Matan Torah with top down, where we only speak about 600,000. No, here Rabbi Abba says Vayakhel. You got to look at Hakel, where it's men, women, and children separately, and this is happening here also. Yet he goes back and says, and this is the 600,000. Why? Because in Hakel, they're spelled out individually. But Rabbi Abba says that here, where it says Vayakhel, and it doesn't spell out it doesn't spell it out like there, men, women, and children. So Rabbi Abba says this comes back in the end of the day. Why doesn't it spell out? Because there still are, so to speak, part of the 600,000. But in actuality, in the instruction where Moshe brings everybody together, men, women, and children, and in the actual unfolding of the donation, you see them as individuals. The women came, the Torah speaks about it openly, and in Ovis, Rabbi Nassan, he says that we derive from the fact that it says Vayikole ha'am mehavi ha'am in the pasuk, which says that the man came and the women came, right, to bring these to bring what they had to bring, and it says the language is Vaitzav Moshe. Moshe said, Ish v'isha al yasu eid, men and women, don't bring any more, we have enough. And it says, Vayikole ha'am mehavi, the people stopped bringing. Obviously, everyone else says that also includes the fact that the children were also giving. So it has to include. So we see the men, women, and children gave, and that's what Rabbi Abba says. That's Vayakhel. This fits in, says the Rebbe, with the theme we're saying, that in this context of the giving, of the reworking of the Mekabel, the women have a superiority, a special advantage. And the fact that the kids were giving is also important to be mentioned. It also speaks about the continuity, the fact that this is going to continue in the future. And therefore, this is spelled out just like by Hakel, except it's not mamish spelled out in the Torah, in the instruction. But later you see that everybody got the point. And the Torah highlights the fact that indeed the women and children came. Paragraph 9. From all of this we can learn, like from everything in Torah, a teaching. Every person has a shlichus, has a mission to make a mishkan for Hashem in the environment in which he finds himself, right? So what do we have to do? We have to bring fellow Jews that you come into contact with closer to Hashem and to serving Hashem. So a person may think, the main thing is to influence the leader of the household, the man. If I bring the leader of the household close to Torah mitzvahs, just like by Matan Torah, when we emphasize the 600,000 heads of household. So then the family will, by definition, will by osmosis be part of it as well. However, we should make an effort to speak also to the women individually and to try and get the children individually to get pulled into keeping Torah mitzvahs. That I don't have to lower myself, so to speak, to deal with children. Maybe it's not my dignity. I speak to the men who are at my level, and through that, I'm not going to waste my time speaking to kids. Through that, the Torah will go to their families. Here we have the teaching that says, no, when it comes to building a Mishkan, when it comes to the generosity for the Mishkan, everybody has an obligation and a schus, the merit, the opportunity to be part of bringing Hashem Shechina in a permanent way to the Bnei Yisrael. That the whole mishpacha should become a place where Hashem's presence rests. Through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. How do you do that? You can only do that only when you don't suffice with only speaking to the leader of the household. When you want it to really become part of what the household is all about and make a real impact and change on the family, there needs to be also, according to the guidelines of Torah, make sure you know the guidelines that are appropriate interactions. You have to have also a plan to work with the mother, who's the foundation of the home, that she should become impacted and involved and enthusiastic about Torah mitzvahs. and also spend effort to reach the kids directly, that more and more Jewish children should be taken and absorbed into kosher Jewish education to the point of holy Jewish education. Chinuch kosher is they shouldn't be in a bad environment, but it could be that they're learning Torah and they're also learning other things. Chinuch al taras hakodesh is even a higher level, learning in a state of purity where the total emphasis is all about learning holy subjects. And through this his askus, through this working with all Jews, men, women, and children, as it says by Vayakhel, and especially besides for just working with heads of household, but actually working with the members of the household as well, the women and the children. So each of them, each of them will actually impact the teshuvah of the other members of the household as well. In other words, the women, by becoming themselves inspired to connection to Hashem, will impact their husbands, rather than what a person may presuppose, that if he impacts the head of the household, he will then impact his wife and his children. No, if the woman herself engages and connects to Hashem, she'll impact her husband. The children will impact their parents as well. As it says, the time Mashiach, Hashem will bring back the hearts of fathers and children, and our sages translate that as being through the children, that the parents will be inspired through the commitment of the children. So if you reach children, they have the power also to bring their parents back. And all of this, Kohol Gadol, this become one big assembly to come back, as the prophet says, to come back to Eretz Yisrael with the coming of Mashiach. Then Mashiach will build the Beis Hamikdash, gather the ingatherings of Israel. May this be b'meheira b'yameinu mamish. If you give me a moment, I'm going to look up take a Medrash Rabbah. I'm really curious that the Rabbi said that when it came to the generosity, of bringing what they needed to do, we find that the Medrash says that they gave incredibly generously, to the extent that they had everything that they needed. Let's see, where is it? So I'm going to look it up, because Rebbe says Ba'arucha b'Midrash Chazal, that it's a great length in Chazal about the generosity. So I'm going to look Bamidbar Rabba Perik Parshas Beis. Parshas Yud Beis. Tes Zayin. Let's see. Parshas Yud Beis and Tes Zayin. So here it says like this. The Medrash says that the Nesiim, this is going on the Parsha of Nosai, where the Nesiim brought the inaugural offerings for the Karbanis. He says, why did they run first to bring it? And when it came to the donations for the Mishkan, they came at the end and they brought only stones. So they said, because when Moshe said everybody who's generous should bring the Truma, the Nesiim, he told everybody, he didn't tell it to the Nesiim, didn't tell it to the leaders. So the Nesiim felt bad. Why didn't they ask us? We're the leaders. The fact that Moshe spoke to the masses, so to speak, told them to bring, so they felt, you know what? Okay, let everybody bring what they bring, and we'll bring whatever's missing. But all the Bnei Yisrael were so excited about the Mishkan, and they brought besimcha, they brought with joy every donation, and with such alacrity. And it says that the men and the women came. Here I'm going to read the Medrash. They were pushing each other. The men and women, usually they would come in a separate way. They were so excited. There was a blurring of the boundaries of tznius here. They were so they couldn't stop the crowds. The surge of the crowd was so great. The women got mixed up, and in 2 mornings they had brought everything, and they had enough. So after those 2 days, the Nesiim wanted to bring. There was everything, but already there was an instruction from Moshe, nothing else needed. So they felt really bad. So you see here the way the Medrash speaks about they were jumping and bringing, and it was a situation where people got mixed up, even in a way that usually wouldn't have been appropriate. Hatzlacha Rabbah.